Hello everyone and welcome to this, which is the second video in our LO6 series. So you guys would remember the first video was an explainer video, and in the explainer video we went through the question in detail and we spoke about why numbers are in specific places and that sort of stuff. So in this video, we're not going to spend too much on how we got to the answer. So if you're looking for how we got to the answer, if you don't understand something in the assessment, I encourage you to go back to ClickUp and just sort of above where this above where this video, where you found this video, you're going to find the previous video, which is where we explained actually the content in the LO6. So this video is just simply going to be focused on marking. It's just marking an assessment. That's all that we're going to be doing here. We've got a student who has gladly agreed for me to use their paper in marking so that you guys can see sort of where I give marks and where I don't give marks. With this specific paper, you're going to see that I'm going to spend a lot of time stopping and looking at alternatives, right? And saying, okay, so what happens if this specific student did this and did that? And that's important for us because not everyone would have a similar answer to this student. So that's important. And so I want you to just pay attention specifically here to the marking. So you'll see I've got a few documents open. I've got the question here. I've also got solution for question 2, which we get to just now. And then I've got the solution for question 1, which I could probably make bigger so you can see on your screen. That's a little bit bigger. Yeah, that's better. And then obviously I've got our student's attempt, right? So this student wrote the assessment under exam conditions. And so let's have a look and let's see if we can mark his or her attempt. Okay, let's go. Okay, so the first thing is the student started off with question 1. So question 1 was written first, which is not required, right? You don't have to write question 1 first if you don't want to, but that's what they have attempted to do. So that's fine. And we'll start then with question 1. You'll notice here that I've allocated, so the marks in purple are presentation marks. The marks in red are actually calculation or mark through, what we call mark through or method marks, right? And so you'll notice that I allocated marks here, or half a mark, to the writing of beat limited and then changes in equity statement. Now, this is how it's supposed to be written. If you have a look at our mock student, you'll see that they have actually done it correctly, right? So I'll give him or her half a mark there. Right? So that's done correctly. Now, if we didn't do that, for this assessment, it's okay, right? For this assessment, it's okay. For example, if we said statement of changes in equity of beat limited for the year ended. So basically we included, the name of the company inside the title, right? That's not allowed. We shouldn't be doing that. But if we've done it for this assessment, it's okay. You'll still get the half mark, right? So I'm not going to penalize you for that, right? We won't be penalizing you for that. So that's the half mark. Then you'll find that there were 4 columns that were required. Obviously, in your solution, you've got this total column, which you don't need to worry about. There were 4 columns that were required, and that being the Class A shares, the non-cumulative convertible preference shares, the revaluation surplus, the retained earnings. So also there was a half mark awarded to that. Now, in the case, so this student, you can see, has all 4. So I'm going to give him or her 1 half mark. But what you're going to notice is that some of you might miss, for example, revaluation surplus, right? If you miss 1 heading, you do not get this mark. So you must have all 4 headings in order to get this mark, right? You must have all 4 headings in order to get this mark. If you miss one, you're not going to get it. So how is the comparatives for the changes in equity statement supposed to be presented? So you're supposed to present the prior year figures at the top of the changes in equity statement. Then you'll have the closing balance for the prior year, which is obviously the opening balance for the current year. And then you are going to have or need to have all the elements that related to the current year. Now, that's how it should be presented. However, what we've noticed when marking is that a lot of students weren't aware of what the full statement looked like, right? So this is a complete statement, what it looked like. They weren't aware of it. So you'll find that even our mock student here, him or her has actually presented this in the form of columns. So there's an additional column you'll see here, right? So they've done a column for 2021, they've done a column for 2022, and so forth for each element, right? For each of the elements of equity. So although that's not how it should be done, for this assessment, I'm willing to accept that. So I'm not going to penalize you. I was actually thinking about it in class of penalizing you um, half a mark. And then as I continued to speak to you guys and I realized that you hadn't seen a comparative one, then I softened, my heart softened, and I decided not to do that. Okay. So you'll find here I'm happy to accept it like this, and so I won't penalize the student. The other thing that I wanted to talk to you about is so that's what it should look like. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about is the amounts here, or how do we get these marks here? In terms of getting the marks of the presentation marks for labeling the different line items, you'll get a half mark for all that you've written that relates to 2021. And then you specifically get a half mark for writing capitalization issue, and you specifically get a half mark for writing a preference share conversion. So just for those 2 amounts, you're going to get a half, just for those 2 line items at least, you're going to get a half mark each, but everything else gets 1 half mark. Notice that you don't get half marks then for any of the other elements in 2022, right? For any of the other stuff in 2022, you don't get marks. So our student, let's have a look. So he or she here has got that, which is the profit, total profit. We've also got the issue, which happened in 2021. We've got the issue that happened in 2021. We've got the ordinary share dividends, and that's for both years. We've got preference share dividends for both years, conversion, issue costs. So we can see that this student has actually got all of the elements that were sitting in 2021. So we can actually give him or her 1 half mark. But then they've also here got the conversion. There you can see the conversion, right? The conversion, right? So we can actually give them half a mark for writing conversion and half a mark for writing capitalization, you see, issue. So they've got half a mark there and half a mark there. So they've basically got all of the, or what you call it, all of the presentation marks, you see. Right, we'll get to the dividends one just now. Okay, so let's go. So the first thing is, this amount, right, of 1,750,000, you can only get if there's a accompanying calculation, as well as the 250,000. You must have an accompanying calculation. If you worked that amount out by using the balancing figure, you get no marks. Okay, so we can see that the student has gotten the amount, right? Student has gotten the right amount there in 2021, the right amount there in 2021, but we can't award the mark until we go and see the calculations. Now, this is why it's important that we reference our calculations. Look at what the student has done. They said 1 here, 9 here. Let's go to the calculation section, right? There we see the calculation. So I'm happy that they've got that calculation. And then I also see the calculation for the revaluation surplus there. So we're happy that they've gotten both of them. They can get half a mark per for each of those amounts, right? Half a mark for each of those amounts. Okay, the next thing that I'm looking for now is the issue that happened on the 15th of September. So the issue that happened on the 15th of September, let's go and have a look. Where has the student put it? Here it is here. You can see it's in the 2021 column. They've got a calculation. Now, if this number is wrong, I'm going to need to go and look at the calculations, which is calculation 2. But we can see now that this student has actually got the right answer there. So you find that the examiner won't go and look at the calculations if the amount is right. There's no need to, right? So we can just allocate one whole mark there, right? But this has an accompanying, right? It has an accompanying share issue cost. And that's what we look for, and we find here, we see it is still in the correct, even though it's a bit lower than the issue is. So you'll see in the solution, we put the issue and immediately after that, the share issue costs. But this student has decided to put it a little bit lower. That's okay. But it's in the correct column, right? So they've correctly disclosed it. So we can then offer them one mark there for that amount as well. Okay, let's go to the next thing. So the next thing is going to be our issue of preference shares. So issue of preference shares, just to recap. So firstly, we said we had not issued any preference shares since inception or incorporation at least, and therefore that's why you see we've got a 0 sitting there as an opening balance. And there has been an issue so far, and it happened in the current year at 250. And so we weren't given the amount of shares issued. That's not what we were given yet. Instead, we were given the rand amount. And so we see to copy that rand amount, we're going to give that student half a mark, right? Later on, we're going to figure out how much the share, how many shares we issued. Okay, then we see that there is actually a OCI, right? And the OCI, how did we get the OCI? You'll see the student has labeled it 10. Let's go and see what they wrote under 10. So you'll see they used the the figure at the end of the year versus the figure at the beginning of the year, giving them a 50,000 Rand movement. And that is what we see there. When we have a look at the amount of marks it attracts, it's 1 mark. And so we offer them 1 mark there. Net profit or profit for the year, right? So I would have said profit for the year. The student here said net profit after tax for the year. It's acceptable. And we can give them half a mark there for saying 1,6, right? And that brings us then to these balances in the center. Now, for all of these balances, 1 mark is awarded, right? And so here is the balance. So even though it's supposed to be in the middle of the statement, as we indicated, the student has done it slightly differently, which is acceptable. And you'll find that the balances are all copied correctly from the question. So because the student has copied the balances correctly, we're going to give him him or her 1/2 mark there. Right? Notice all the balances for 2021, end of 2021, beginning 2022 have been copied correctly. Right? So we can award those marks there. Right. Now let's start then with 2022. We see in April there was a capitalization issue. Here's the capitalization issue here. Again, the amount that the student has entered is correct, right? So we can give them we can give them 2 marks, right, for the correct amount in retained earnings. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 4 half marks, and then a half a mark for correctly adding it to ordinary shares. So the half a mark is if they got the sign and the amount is the same as what they had deducted from retained earnings. So again, if they calculated the wrong amount, but they did the correct operation, so they correctly added it, they would get a half a mark here. So if you're marking yours and you see, oh, I didn't actually get 3.150 million, you can still then actually award yourself a half mark if you correctly added it to this ordinary share capital. Right. So the student got four half marks there, one half mark there. Then the next transaction is going to be the conversion. So I think I just want to see if I need to show you something. So I wanted to show you now what the student has done here, right? When it came to the capitalization issue, right? Because this is an interesting one. So the student has taken the balance immediately before the capitalization issue, that was 1.5 million, divided it by 4, because we were giving one share for every 4 held, right? So they divided it by 4 to get the amount that would be issued. You see, they're trying to get the amount that would be issued. They then applied it by the rate to give us the 3,150,000. So that was correct. So notice I didn't put any ticks in the calculation part, right? Because I'm not interested in the calculation part, because this specific student got it right in the statement. But if you had gotten it wrong in the statement, you wouldn't allocate any marks to the statement. Instead, you'll go to the calculation and allocate the marks there, right? So let's have a look at the next one, 6. You'll see here the student has noticed how they've just applied 40% to the value, to the rand amount of the capital, and which is correct, right? So there we can give them 1 mark for deducting it from the correct column. So it's a 2022 column in the preference shares, and we give them 1 mark for correctly, 1 half mark for correctly adding it then to your capital. Okay, then same story with the other comprehensive income. You're going to see that they got the other comprehensive income correct there, and that is half a mark. Notice how in the prior year, in 2021, it was 1 mark, but I can't give you marks for doing the same thing twice. So I can only give you half a mark as a method mark for copying and using the correct method. Then, in the current year, the question told us that there was 2,100,000 as profit before tax and 400,000 as your tax amount. We then said, oh, you need to also consider this information in the entire question as to whether it affects the profit. Now, it didn't affect the profit, right? So you didn't need to make any changes, right? So what you could have simply done is gone and taken the 2.1 million and deducted 400,000, and that would have given you 1,700,000. Now that is what this student has done. You can see that. If you didn't do that, you're going to need to assess what amounts you've entered. For example, let's say you have incorrectly entered 2.1 million here under retained earnings, under profit, right? You can give yourself half a mark, right? But this student has done the correct thing, so we can give him or her 1 mark. So that's 2 half marks, you see? So if you had the wrong amount, and let's say you put 2,100,000, you're going to actually put your half mark there, right? Okay, now let's get to the brass tacks. This is the sort of the difficult part, and this is the dividends part. So the first dividend I gave you in the question, so I'm only going to give you half a mark for saying that first dividend. The next one, you were supposed to apportion it. Let's have a look at how the apportionment should have worked. What you should have done is you should have said we had issued, in terms of rands, 1,250,000. We issued them at 2 rand 50 each. Yeah, and then we can apply the dividend of 75 cents. That would have given us 300 and 75,000. Now, if you had put 375,000 there, you would give yourself 1 mark. So 1 tick for that and 1 tick for that. Let me just confirm if that's what we were doing. Sorry about that. You would give yourself 1 half mark. You would give yourself 1 half mark in that situation. I just want to see here, 1 there, 1 there. Actually, you'll give yourself 1.5 marks. If you had 375,000, so if you actually had this amount, right, 375,000 under dividends in 2021, you should have gotten 1.5 marks. But this student obviously apportioned it. Oops, I wasn't intending to do that. This student obviously apportioned it, so they are going to get the full 2 marks, right? So that's the full 2 marks. So that's 4. So I go 1, 2, 3, 4. They get full 2 marks, right? The next thing is if we look at the dividends for 2022. So let's go and have a look at the dividends then for 2022. You'll see here that there's quite a lot of calculations that we needed to do. The first thing we needed to do is exclude the conversion, right? So we exclude the converted amounts. And then we're calculating dividends for shares that have been here for the entire year, right? So that's 300,000 shares times 75. That would have given us 225,000, right? 225,000 rand. If you had that amount, you would get 1 mark for that. But if you then went and said, okay, now I know I need to apportion it for the shares that were traded, you say 200,000 times the 75 cents times 4 months over 12, you would have then gotten the additional amounts, right? The additional the additional 1 mark for doing that step. So this student has actually done the correct and got the correct answer. So what we'll do now is we'll give him or her 4 ticks. Now the last one, which is the dividends for ordinary shares, that one is a lot trickier. So what we needed to do there is we needed to identify what was the cost, right, of the or what was the amount of the shares just before we started doing all these strange things in 2022. So we know that from previously, the amount of shares should have been 1.5 million. We then had this conversion. How did the conversion work? We had 500,000 shares. We figured that out back in calculation. We figured that out back in calculation 6, that we had 500,000 shares in issue. We then need to multiply that by 40% because we were told 40% of these shares were converted. That would have given us 200,000 shares. And we then multiply those 200,000 shares by 6 shares because each preference share got 6 ordinary shares. That gives us an amount of 1.2 million shares, right? So in that case, you would have gotten 1 mark for determining 1.2 million shares. You would have gotten another half mark if you had determined that we also had this capitalization issue. And the capitalization issue would have yielded to us 375,000 shares, right? So now what we've established is that we know that we need to, or that we have an opening balance of 1.5 million. We added a conversion of 1.2 million, and we added a capitalization issue of 375,000. That gives us 3,075,000. We multiply that by the dividend of 20 cents, and that gives us our final amount. Now, let's say you had all wrong amounts, but you had 20 cents. You would get half a mark for that. For example, if you took the 1.5 times 20 cents, you'd get 1 mark for that. So these are interchangeable marks and they don't all have to be obtained at the same time. Right. So that in total is 2.5 marks. So this student is going to get 2.5 marks. Let's go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That is 2.5 marks there. Okay. Don't think we've missed anything. The last thing is the dividend. You'll see that the student has given us both dividends for both year. However, there was only 1.5 mark available for the current year only, right? So we can, I think the student is probably right in disclosing both, but the solution, like, it's just for 2022, right? Right, so then let's have a look at required 2. So in required 2, we were now recording from Treble Limited's perspective, right? So we're changing gears, recording from Treble Limited's perspective. Notice that here, the student has said investment in Beat Limited. They can get a 0.5 mark for that because they've specified that it's in the SFP. The next one, they haven't said bank. They've said non-discretionary cash reserves, which is bank. That is what bank is. It's a non-discretionary cash reserve. But they've said non-discretionary cash reserve instead of bank. Now, that is an acceptable statement. It's not the correct statement, but it's acceptable, right? And you'll see that the amount that they used was the purchase price. Now, if anything else was used except the purchase price, no marks can be awarded for the amount. In this case, we can award actually 0.5 mark, right? Then they recorded the dividends. So these were the only transactions that you should have been recording. It's the dividends, right? And remember, we're recording from the perspective of Treble. So Treble is receiving the dividend, right? Which means and we were also told that the dividend was only paid in January 7 or on January 7th, which means at year end it was not received. Therefore, it was accrued dividends, right? And the related income, which is an SPL account, was also dividend income. So that's correct. Now look at what the student has done here. The student has copied, right, the amount that they included in the changes in equity. They have copied that amount correctly to these journal entries, right? Then we can award 0.5 mark. So even if the amount was wrong, but they copied it correctly, they must get a 0.5 mark, right? So even if the amount was wrong, but it was copied correctly, 0.5 mark can be awarded. The investment is then revalued at the end of the year. There's actually no calculation. I don't think so. But the amount is correct. So the student actually took a risk by not producing a calculation here. But basically, there's a movement between the purchase price, which was 2.50 Rand, right to the 3.15 Rand, right, at the end of the year, which would have given us 65 cents. We would have multiplied the 65 cents by the 500,000 preference shares. And that means that we would have gotten 325,000 in a revaluation, in a fair value adjustment. Right. So how many marks should they have gotten for the amount? They should have gotten 3 marks, 3 ticks or 1.5 marks. So if you didn't get that amount and yet you still use the correct rand or fair value amount. So look here, there's a 0.5 mark that is allocated to 3.15 Rand. There's 0.5 mark allocated to 2.50 Rand. And if you had just that right and you got the number of shares wrong, you would then get 1 mark in that situation. Okay. Okay, cool. Notice we didn't actually touch this specific student's calculations because they weren't actually required. You see, they weren't actually required. So oftentimes when you get a question back and you see, oh, they haven't really done much with my calculations, it's either because you've done really well and we didn't need it. But if you see that you haven't gotten the marks in the statement, but we still haven't, there's been no marking being done on the workings, then you can query that. Okay. So let's have a look at the MCQs. The first MCQ, question 1, the correct answer was A. We can give half a mark there. Right? If again, if you need an explanation on why it was the correct answer, you can go and look at the previous video. The next answer was B, so we can give half a mark there. Question 3, the correct answer was A. I'll give half a mark there. Question 4, we were looking for A, B, and E. Each of those attract half a mark. So A, B, and E, the student had all of them, so we can give half a mark there. Sorry, 1.5 marks there. And then here, we were looking for 2 answers, that being C and D, and this student actually did have C and D there. Then, when we look at 6, we see that the correct answer was D. The student there got the correct answer, and this is worth 1 mark, right? This question is worth 1 mark, so I gave them 2 ticks. And then finally, the last question, which is question 7, right? The correct answers, there's more than 1 correct answer. So if you chose A, you would have gotten 0 marks allocated to you. B attracts 1 mark, C attracts 1.5, D attracts 1.5, E attracts 1.5, F attracts 1.5. So you actually stood a very good chance here of scoring marks, you see, because there were multiple ways that you could have scored marks. Obviously, the correct answer was G, and to incentivize and to give a benefit to those students that chose G, the most amount of marks is allocated to G, which is 2.5. This student, as you can see here, has chosen G, so they get 2.5, which is 5 ticks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. And that is how we mark this test. So guys, I hope that helped you and cleared up any sort of confusion around marking. And yeah, all the best, and I hope you guys do well. Thanks. Bye-bye.